Right, I've got my notes. Oh, Jesus, that nearly fell off my lap. Okay. Hi guys, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Actors Waiting Room podcast, and it's Movie of the Month episode this week. So we are going to be talking about the film Fury. I feel that I have picked two films now in a row that star Brad Pitt, but in my defense, they are both really, really great films. And I was actually kind of struggling to pick a film for this month because I have so many, and I think we'll realize like as we go on that I like a dark, gritty, or a dramatic piece with like a difficult storyline. I mean, like a difficult arc for a character. Maybe that's what it is. So you'll soon see. So I was trying to decide which one first, but I have also, Babylon, the one that we did beforehand, I say that's quite a crazy, chaotic film that there are some light and dark moments. This one is, there's a lot of dark moments, and there's probably maybe one or two light moments in this film. But I really do suggest that you watch it if you haven't already. It's quite an old film now, I'd say. It's not like a new film that's come out. It was directed by David Ayer, who has done Suicide Squad. He's also done End of Watch and The Tax Collector. He often directs he also wrote Fury, I think. He often sort of directs films that focus on like a tight-knit group of people and how their relationships affect one another and how they kind of move as a team. I feel like he focuses on that really well. It's also obviously starring Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, Michael Peña, Jon Bernthal, and Logan Lerman, who plays this very sort of like youngish character in comparison that comes into this tight-knit group. So the film is set in Europe, in Nazi Germany, where Americans are coming over in tanks to help fight the Germans, essentially. I picked this film because it focuses a lot on ensemble acting, working as a team, reacting rather than sort of big monologues and speeches. It also really showcases I think a really good character arc from multiple people. There is obviously, we follow this very small, tight-knit group of people that are going through a very stressful circumstances, and we get to see a range of different personalities in different people, but how they work together and how they sort of do this also really tough career of working in this tank and fighting in the war. It's awful. I think it shows a lot of great listening and reacting skills. I think it's just fantastic for all those reasons. There's lots of pauses, there's lots of naturalistic sort of moments within the scene, as well as sort of dramatic for, it is a film at the end of the day. I don't know how much in terms of historical accuracy there is, but I do know that David Ayer has a lot of military background in terms of his family. And I think a few friends were serving in the military, and he's also kind of always been around that, he said in interviews, and so he's always wanted to create a storyline around war, basically, and focused on, people working in tanks, because you don't see that very often. You see a lot of people obviously on the trenches and fighting on land combat, and you see obviously air raids and bombing, but you don't see a lot of it's the first film I've watched about people fighting in the war in a tank, which is very claustrophobic. It's tight, it's pressured. Yeah, there's a lot of tension in this film. It is very dark, and very gruesome. If you are someone that doesn't like a gruesome film, the acting alone is really amazing if you can push past the gruesome parts. But yeah, just a little warning that it is very violent. It is quite shocking. So just be aware when you're watching this film, I guess. We're going to jump straight into character work this time, and we're going to focus on Brad Pitt, because Brad Pitt is fabulous in most things, but I really do believe he's a very generous actor in scenes. He just really effortlessly gives to a scene. There's so much great listening skills that he does, and even though he is a main focal point for the film, and he is essentially the leader of this very tight-knit group of people, it doesn't seem arrogant or trying to steal the scene in any way. He's very giving to the circumstances and the scenes. And I noticed that a lot in Babylon as well. And obviously that's like another sort of ensemble type of film where, you know, you've got multiple main characters that are going through things and there's kind of equal screen time for those things. But in this scenario, we do have that as well, but we are mainly focusing a little bit more on him, but essentially this tight-knit group, and he leads this group through, you know, through a lot of very pressured situations. He has a really good sense of like push and pull, which is essentially an inner and an outer kind of action or an objective, which is basically essentially what you want to display on the front. So he displays a very sort of tough, collected, almost calm. I mean, it's not a calm situation and he does shout a lot, but he's very sort of collected in these sort of very high pressure moments. That's I think how he sort of establishes his leadership within the group as well, although there is a lot of play of like hierarchy within the film about when people start to rear their heads, which is a really interesting thing to observe when you're watching this group of people go through this journey. But yeah, he's sort of very calm and collected, like very just, he appears very strong on the outside, and I think tries to relay this kind of shut off emotion. And then when you see him in his private moments, you know, he has, I mean, not that there's many because they are confined most of the time, but there is a section where Norman has not long been introduced to this sort of team, and he's only been in the army for about 8 weeks, I think it is. And you can tell because he's very sort of, his tempo is a little bit quicker, his eyes are a little bit more wild there. You know, he's observing everything quickly, he's more panicky. There's, you know, whereas the rest of them, they may feel these types of emotions still, like this pressure and this fighting for their lives, because they are every day, but there is a little bit more, they're used to those things. And so the contrast, just even in like when Norman enters into this sort of vicinity, they're very calm and they make jokes about, you know, these morbid situations, I think because they have to sort of carry on. Whereas Norman is experiencing with fresh eyes for the first time, and we're also experiencing that with him. So we are able to see through Norman's eyes about how sort of devastating and wild and awful these like situations are that they're in. But I think Brad Pitt puts on a very good front, and then there's only small moments where he goes to the side and he has sort of a moment to himself where you see sort of his inner emotions, which is, you know, he's struggling. It's awful. He wants to pull himself together, but he can't. And so there's a really good push and pull within all of those scenes. And I think you see that with a lot of the characters as well, like particularly with, I think it's Michael Peña's character. He's very sort of, he's more of a grounded character. He's quite warm and more open. But again, he's still in a high pressured situation, and he's still shouting at Norman as well when he does stuff wrong, because essentially Norman at one point doesn't start shooting people and they essentially could get killed. So there's a very high, pressured situation. And I think when you put all these characters together in such a high pressured situation, you really see some fantastic acting coming out. I did research as well that they were entered into like a boot camp situation with the military, and just to get that real sense of like what life was like for, you know, those soldiers that were doing, you know, awful things and having awful things done to them. And you can really see that in like their weariness, like the way that I said before, like Norman comes in with a very more fresh, energetic tempo, whereas they who have been in the like they've been serving in the war for a longer time, they're exhausted, and you can see that their movements are much slower than Norman's are, and everything seems like a great effort, and their emotions are constantly, there's a lot of restraint going even with each an individual character to say or to feel what they're actually feeling, which must be panic, oh my god, I want to run, I don't want to do this anymore. Whereas Norman doesn't really have he doesn't really, at the start, shall I say, he doesn't really have a push and a pull. He doesn't have an inner and an outer, because his inner is just feeding into the outer, because he's like, what on earth is going on? I'm supposed to be an admin clerk. I don't want to do this. I didn't sign up for this. I'm a typist. I can't do this. And we sort of see his sort of raw emotion come out. Another interesting character and one really fascinating to watch is Jon Bernthal. And his character is almost, he's so frightened. You can see the fear in his eyes, but he's also it's a different type of fear to Norman's. His is like traumatic, really traumatic. He's seen and done some probably really awful things, and you can see that in him. And there's kind of like a dehumanization with his character. I mean, there's a dehumanization with all of their characters because, you know, I think the only way that they're getting through and doing these awful things and having awful things done to them is to kind of slowly detach yourself from your reality and just live, you know, and try and get rid of your emotions. But the way that Jon Bernthal handles his emotions is really interesting. He becomes quite volatile, he's quite aggressive. He's in it to he's not in this war to entertain himself, but it appears that he really likes to goad Norman, and he really likes to pick and play and push people, probably because he's so dissatisfied with what's going on. But he is kind of the most, I would say, unhuman one of them in that tank, I would say, because Shia LaBeouf, his character is very spiritual and very sort of disciplined to his religion, and I think that's the thing that he holds on to be able to hold on to his sense of self, whereas I think Brad Pitt pretends not to care but internally does and still has that kind of human side to him. But I think, yeah, Jon Bernthal's character is very sort of damaged, and his acting is brilliant in that. He's got a very sort of laid back, there's a scene I think when Norman is first introduced and then he has to go clean the inside of the tank, which is, to spare any gory details, it's not very nice in there, and he's given a bucket and some soap or something, and he has to go in there, but Jon is kind of enjoying that he has to go and do that, and he teases him and taunts him. His body language is very sort of laid back on the tank. His physicality is really interesting in comparison to the rest of them. Their physicality towards the tank is interesting as well, the way that they hang off it, the way that they move on it. It's kind of second nature to them, which I find really clever, and I think that's obviously something that they would have learned in the boot camp. But the way that they sit on the tank and that they operate is driven through their character, and they all have different ways of doing it, and that's what's interesting as well. They all have different ways of how they sit, lean, hang off the tank, which you can go back and spot, and they all have their own different things. It's very clever. It's really interesting to watch. Another thing that's nice in the film, which I think is due to direction, is the fact that some scenes they linger on the ensemble for longer. So there's a scene, I think, when they're on their way to their next sort of assignment, and Brad Pitt is sort of hanging out the top of the tank, and then there's Shia LaBeouf, who's also close by. And what's interesting is the camera sort of lingers on them for a little bit longer, and we see this really sort of naturalistic laugh, and then we see some silence, and then we see a laugh again. And it's just prolonged shots like that obviously the director has put in there for a reason, that kind of make it more natural. And again, we see another side to that ensemble. So it's really interesting the way that he's obviously decides to do that as part of the direction. And you do get to see just another side to these characters that's not so, scripted. It's not so scripted. And that's what's so lovely to see in moments like that. And there's lots of moments where we focus on things that are, the camera is not, or the shots, I don't mean this in a bad way, but the shots are not as movie magic, cinematography, really arty shots. They're very, we're here, this is what this is, and it's very naturalistic. And I don't know if I can speak to obviously the historical accuracy of certain things because I'm not a historian, but it just makes the atmosphere feel more naturalistic and not so, we're watching this dramatic movie about World War II. So I thought that was a really interesting thing as well. So another thing that they do great as a team, I think, is that not only do we have these distinct characters that have all come through, we also see Norman transform from this fresh sort of, I would say, more energetic, frightened new soldier that's just come in to this group of people that are very exhausted, tired, say a bit, very emotionally stunted. And we see Norman start to gain some kind of power and effect on the rest of the group, which is really interesting. So There's a scene again with Jon Bernthal where he says, I think you're a better man than any of us. I think you're a really good man. And I think to start with, I mean, that happens much later on in the film, but I think to start with, that's what gets Jon's back up. That's why he's a little bit more goady and volatile towards Norman, or towards Logan, shall I say, who's the actor that plays Norman, because he reminds him of this kind of human ability that makes choices, and Logan's character is a person that doesn't want to shoot people and would rather actually be shot and just kill, he would rather die than actually hurt another human being. And I think the only time he really, we do see this transition of him slowly being evolved into the group, but also not only does he change, but he changes the others and how they actually are reminded a bit more of their humanity, which I think is really interesting, particularly with Jon's character. Okay, let's talk about favourite scenes. I'm sure this is everyone's favourite scene from Fury, if you have watched it and loved it. It is the breakfast scene in a German town that they have found themselves in. So it is, it's so lovely. We've had all this like horrific, chaotic sort of war and hardship, and we've also seen, Brad and Logan's characters have this really sort of, they butt heads because, Brad's character tries to essentially force Logan's character to shoot a German, like right there and then, and he doesn't want to, and he tries to force him to do it, and as I said before, like Logan's character says he'd rather die than actually just shoot this person. He doesn't want to do it. But then obviously after those moments we see them arrive in this German town, which they've basically are stocking up on resources and things for themselves. Brad Pitt's character takes Logan's character to basically up the stairs to this like block of flats essentially, and it's quite wealthy, and they come across these two women that are living in this flat, and we see this really sort of human, calm, positive moment amongst all of this chaos, and it's such a great scene. And we also see like Logan's character sort of gain a bit of confidence because he's being treated kind of a bit more kindly by Brad's character as well, and he gains a bit of I think he gains a bit more respect for Brad because he's trying to help him in another way. And they basically essentially go up to this apartment. They basically speak to these women. They are able to have breakfast with them. Logan's character starts playing the piano. We see also a real sort of nice dynamic between, Brad's character does speak a bit of German, but Logan's character does not speak any. And we see like translation of thoughts and conversations when either of them don't know the same language, and they have their own moment, and that's lovely to watch as well. And then obviously that lovely moment is only very brief, because then the rest of the team, who have been getting drunk and doing all sorts outside, come in, and they get very threatened by the fact that Brad's character is treating Logan's character with a bit more, they're left out and they're hurt and they're upset because they treat, Brad Pitt's character is this kind of father figure, and so now is he getting special treatment? And then they sit down and there's a real sort of tension. We then see Shia LaBeouf's character sort of gain a bit more dominance in this scene, and that's really interesting to watch because we haven't seen him gain that much authority yet. And the way that he does that, and he sort of goes, we're sort of left out, and he challenges Brad Pitt's character, and Brad Pitt's character actually just lets him do it. And that's another power play as well. And that scene is really tense and really interesting to watch. Before the rest of the team come in, we also see Brad Pitt's character be able to, like shave and wash himself properly, and he hasn't been able to probably do that in God knows how many weeks. And we see actually a slightly bit of calm come across his face, and it's a really needed moment in a film like that because it's so intense and it's quite dark and it's very morbid and hard, and you can feel that. And then we have this lovely break of lightness, and then once obviously they've all left and they have to move on to their next assignment, unfortunately a bomb hits that apartment, and sadly those two women die. And it's just, and it's another hard-hitting reminder of moments at that time are really precious, and you don't know when your last moment will be in a time like that. So it's a really, really touching scene. The other sort of big scene, I suppose, is towards the end, and we see them all grit together for another time. So Norman has been, which is Logan's character, has been fully accepted into the group now, and they now bond over the fact that there are a lot of German soldiers coming and their tank has broken down and they are supposed to hold the crossroads, but it's just them and they can't move any further. And so Brad Pitt's character makes the decision that he goes, well, you can go run off, go find some, go find the next patrol or next group of people and save yourselves, and he decides that he will sort of self-sacrifice. And we see that again, and they all basically eventually say that they will all die together at the end. But there's just this moment of like solidarity and brotherhood, and there's lots of touching in a way that's of a family style, and it happens actually throughout the film as well, that a lot of them like touch the back of each other's necks, which is such a very father figure moment of touching the back of like a man's neck and like patting them or rubbing them on the back or giving support. And there's a lot of that throughout the film, but in this scene particularly there is even more so, and they pass around whatever liquor that is. I don't even know what it is. It looks disgusting. But they pass that round and they share moments and stories and things together. And again, you see this really fantastic like ensemble work, and they're listening and they're reacting, and there's not really much being said, and they're laughing, and it's just a really good masterclass in looking at ensemble work and looking at listening and reacting. It's really good. That final moment when they're in the tank before they start shooting at Germans is a really sort of, I don't want to say it's like a touching moment, because it's a really hard moment as well, because it's not ideal, is it, that they're going to go off and do that, or that they're going to self-sacrifice themselves in any way. But it's a really interesting scene for like a multiple emotions. There's happiness, they're frightened, there's like a sadness there. There's also kind of like an anger as well, like an underlying anger there, that they're stuck here and that they're doing it. There's always kind of a moment of like giving up as well, because they're giving up on their survival instincts. Like it's just a really interesting scene to see multiple emotions being passed around in such a short space of time. And that's what's clever and what they do really, really well. And I can't imagine what it was like, being in such a tight space and being with people like that. That's like a different form of intimacy that not many of us will know, because we won't know what that feels like. But yeah, it's really interesting for that. So I think, yes, definitely go watch the film. Definitely, I think it's one that obviously highlights everything that I've already said, but it's a really good masterclass in listening and reacting and ensemble work and really good character work, and it's one of those films that I have rewatched a few times, and I think it's great. I think it's a really, really good film, and you can learn so much from it, and also not even just learn much, it's just a great film. So yeah, definitely go and watch it. Yeah, so that was kind of the end of the episode. I didn't really have many movie facts for this one. There really wasn't many. I think the only one was that like the director had come from sort of surrounded by a family in a military background, and that's why he wanted to do it. So I haven't got any like movie facts for you on this one. But yes, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you in the next one.